Cosmic shopping, baby!
To purchase t-shirts and merchandise with my art on it, just click on the eye on the top right hand side of the screen and it will take you right to my shop.
So recently I had someone ask about, what type of training split should they perform? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of each training split, and why would they choose one over the other? So again, I'm going to start this off by saying there is no such thing as the right training split. There are different types of splits, and each split will have different advantages and disadvantages, okay? So from a bodybuilding perspective, what you want to do is you want to hit as many different muscle fibers as possible. And from doing so, you add muscle mass to the fast twitch fibers, the slow twitch fibers. And you are understanding also through this whole process the limitations of maybe your nervous system coordination and stuff, and how this may play a factor in your training, For instance, some bodybuilders also do cardio. They do, easy cardio. So that way their cardiovascular system isn't a weak link in their training. So the truth is, anything that is a weak link in you being able to push yourself in the gym, that is something that must be addressed in your split, okay? So for example, the primary reason why I started training legs more often than once in a week or twice was because when I was coming around to leg training again, I found that I was always out of breath. Now, there are a couple ways I could have dealt with this. One way is I could have done more cardio. I could have done cardio period, because a lot of times I never did cardio, right? I could have, rode the bike, and perhaps that would have assisted with, the cardiovascular system and helped me basically feel less out of breath in between sets and be able to really get that mind-muscle connection. That would have been one way. But the other way was me to increase the frequency of my leg training. So I started training legs 3 times a week, about 5 sets, 6 sets tops, and that's not including warm-ups. And then I started, using higher rep ranges because I knew if I went heavy all the time, because I knew from experience when I went too heavy, then you start snapping stuff up, right? You start, because the fast twitch fibers do not recover as fast as the slow twitch fibers. So fast twitch power fibers, which are bigger around, they have a higher diameter, and they will increase your muscular gains faster. Like you'll gain more muscle mass by working those fibers, but you can't work them as frequently, because if you do, you will get injured and you'll have a tendency to have more muscle tears and sprains and so forth. Okay, not to mention the joint mileage, because you're using heavy poundages in order to address those fibers. Okay, so taking that into account, I started to cycle my repetitions, and training body parts more often allowed me to have higher rep days without feeling the overwhelming pressure to have this super heavy day every time I trained the muscle, because I was only getting it in once a week. Okay, so just so you know, I spent years doing the 3-day split. It was like about 5 years, probably 4 years doing, one day I would do legs and calves and abs. The other day I would do chest and back. And then the other day I would do shoulders and bis and tris. Okay. So the advantage of doing a 3-day split, so say you're doing a 3-day split or a 4-day split, is that you can get a different type of muscle fiber in your workout. And what I mean by that is you're doing so many sets that eventually there are different muscle fibers that have to kick in. Whether they're called 2B or 2C or endurance, whatever, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that once you really exhaust a muscle and you exhaust it from different angles and you keep on pounding it to death, not only are you trying to get so much blood flow in there, and not only are you getting, a different type of biochemical response because of all the lactic acid and everything in there and the blood flowing in there and getting this extreme pump, you're also telling the muscle that, hey, I'm going to work you like an endurance workout with power at the same time. So you're going to have to basically make sure you step up your game with storing creatine and ATP and well, not necessarily ATP, because ATP doesn't really, it's creatine phosphate is really how you store ATP mostly, and glycogen, and you're going to have to basically make sure that you have plenty in store in the muscle in order to take care of a long workout with high intensity, right? So from a bodybuilding standpoint, you will put on muscle mass in certain types of muscle fibers training like that, okay? And I noticed I did put on a certain amount of muscle mass. But at some point you start to say, okay, what is my weak link now? And one part of my weak link was, when I was coming on the legs, I was out of breath. But another part of my weak link was also nervous system, okay? And what I mean by this was coordination. So when it takes you a while to get your squat groove down or your bench groove, like you do a bench press, but if you haven't done it for a whole week, it kind of feels like there's a little bit of shakiness, there's a little bit of imbalance. It's not like you don't have this solid groove, like where there's a tightness that feels like you're wearing a bench shirt even though you're not, it just feels like the weight is just going up by itself. that groove, you kind of fall out of it if you go long periods of time in between training a muscle group. Okay, so if your nervous system becomes the weak link, at that point you won't be able to lift as much weight or push the muscle as hard. So this is the primary premise of training body parts more frequently, even if I'm doing it light. It's like I'm constantly making sure I'm priming the nervous system, so that way when I train, I can push the muscle fibers as far as they can go, because the nervous system is not the weak link in the whole, scenario. Okay, so the advantage to training more frequently, okay, so if you're doing a 3 or 4 day split, you're not training as frequent, you're hitting those fibers that are responsible for really kicking in after you hit total exhaustion and you continue to go, okay, those are a certain type of muscle fibers, which I highly recommend you do train and you cycle your training programs. So you do the 3 day split or the 4 day split, and then sometimes you do more frequent and less frequent, okay? So knowing that, when you go to a more frequent type of training, what will happen is that you may put on more strength. Now, the advantage of putting on more strength is that your nervous system is more primed and tuned, and now it can lift more weight. Now you can do more repetitions with more weight. And now when you do hit those long endurance workouts, you're really going to pump that muscle up, and that muscle is going to respond better. It's going to actually get bigger and stronger to respond to that extra stimulus, because now you have more strength in order to push the muscle fibers. You see, so in a higher frequent type training program, I would say, yeah, you hit the endurance fibers a lot. You do hit the slower twitch fibers because you're doing higher repetitions and things. But you're also, the odd day, you're totally primed so that when you do go heavy, you are hitting the fast twitch fibers. And it's like when you hit the fast twitch fibers, you get so sore from that. And then when you have a lower weight day or a higher repetition day, that helps pump the blood in there. So it's almost like it helps prime the recovery. So I found that training frequently by doing higher repetitions actually helped me recover faster, because when I was, totally sore and I just worked out really light, it felt like, okay, now I'm getting the blood in there, I'm heating up the muscle, and then the nutrients are traveling in and out, and it felt like I was actually recovering much faster. So it's like the higher repetitions, helped with the whole process. It wasn't like I was beating my muscles down more than actually helping with the recovery from the heavy workouts, right? So there's two psychological ways to look at this and two physical ways to look at it. And you can approach from both sides. You can go in the gym and say, I want to do a high rep day and just kill myself in there. Or if you're extremely sore, you can go and do a higher rep day, but take it really easy, make sure the movements are slower and stuff, make sure you're not pulling anything, but at the same time, you're making sure that there's some blood flowing in there to assist with the recovery, so that way you're putting on muscle mass at a faster rate, okay? So the higher frequency type training, really what it really helps is it helps you build that callus type effect. And I talk about this before in another video, is the callus effect. If you work a muscle group too hard, or if you say you're digging a ditch every day, and you're digging just a little bit, you'll put a little bit of a callus on your hand, and you do this every day. But if you went out and dug a ditch only once a week, but you went really hard, every time you just tear your hand up to pieces, right? So that's the premise of my training when I train more frequent, is that I know that if I just prime the pump just a little bit every day, prime the pump, just keep on working the muscle just a little bit, then what happens, I build the callus without, overload, okay? But, there is not a right way or wrong way here. I do actually go to 3 day splits from time to time and just start, doing the 20 set workouts and just really push, into my limitation there. Because pushing in your limitation will help you with, hitting whatever your weak link is at the time. So the higher set workouts with less frequency will hit a different muscle fiber type than if you're going more frequent and hitting the muscles all the time. Okay, so it's a matter of just choosing what feels right to you, what is actually assisting you with growing and gaining in muscle and gaining in strength. And if you're noticing something's happening, then that may be the right program for you at that time, but then you'll notice that there's a plateau, and then it's a good time to change the routine up and just to see what your body responds to. So there's no right or wrong. I mean, the standard thing that I, designed a program around back in the day was 48 hours to 72 hours is when the muscle recovers. They say the muscle recovers within 48 to 72 hours fully from a workout. But what I found is that my recovery was actually happening in 24 to 48 hours. Somewhere in there where I felt like just a little bit tight, but pretty darn good. Like I could still go back after it. And I was actually motivated to train, right? Whereas if I went over that hump and totally recovered and then waited a day or so, it's almost like my motivation started to wane. It started to go away. It was almost like the muscles weren't primed anymore to train. So that's why the higher frequency training program really seemed to work for me. But you have to find what works for you and what feels right, right? So yeah, if you're doing super heavy weights too, like say if you're always, in the 5 rep range and failure, and that's the way you're training, I would say that you probably will need a lower frequency type of training, because there are other factors involved, the nervous system stuff, and there are your immune system, and also your joints can only take so much of a beating, right? If you're going 5 reps and you're hitting failure with 5 reps in all your training, I would never recommend training like that. But if that's the way you want to train and that's the way that works for you, then I would say, yeah, you'll probably need longer days off. You'll probably need more of a day off to recover, because you're actually going to be getting into a lot of joint recovery, the ligaments and tendons and that kind of thing. Okay. So I hope that helps you out anyway. And thanks a lot for watching. Make sure you subscribe and share my stuff. And I'll talk to you soon.
Do it your way.
Here I am on the podium, victory for me. Here I am on a podium, been here since you were